joining. There we go. I'm so glad to be back with everyone. And I'm really glad that the way the Parshiyot lined up with my vacation, because I want to be able to wrap up the Joseph story with all of you, which we've played with, over these past few weeks, and it's unfolding. And the piece that I'm going to pull up is not the denouement, but the addendum. What's it called after you the little part after the story, right? The
epilogue.
So they epilogue. Thank you, Joel. So Jacob has now died, and they've buried him, and his sons carry him to the land of Canaan. Can you see my screen, everybody? Yes, good. And they bury him in the cave in the field of Machpelah, the field near Mamre, which Avram had brought for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. And here we go. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did him?" So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, 'Forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father's house.'" And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him and said, "We are prepared to be your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. And so fear not, I will sustain you and your dependents." Thus he assured them, speaking kindly to them. So Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm hearing feedback and an echo. It might be Jack. Jack, I'm going to hit mute for you, but if you want to participate in the conversation, ask your aide to unmute, just because I think it might be the feedback from your computer. Yeah, okay, that helped. So my question is, what's going on for Joseph here? Let's just linger for a moment in the story before we play with some midrash. What's going on for Joseph and the brothers in this scene? Let's unpack it a little bit.
Well, the nice thing is that the brothers are finally acknowledging they were guilty.
Good. So they're finally at this point acknowledging they're guilty. And why are they doing this? What do you think frees them up to do or gets them there?
Because they're afraid of Joseph taking retribution against them. When you stand before a judge who can sentence you for a criminal act, it's always a good idea to acknowledge your guilt and throw yourself on the judge's mercy.
Sarah logged off. She's a federal prosecutor. Yeah. I saw a hand. She's Bernie.
Well, the first thing is, of course, there's no record of Jacob having given such instruction.
Beautiful. Thank you. Right. So they're kind of making it up. Right.
They continued to fabricate, and basically they did it because they expected retribution from Joseph.
Yeah, so it seems like for them, it's coming from a place of fear, right? And retribution, and Jacob's not around to keep everybody in order. So now the question is, what's going on for Joseph here? Like his reaction, what do we make of his reaction?
He's a better person.
Than what? Than he was before, than they are?
Like it just kind of, he's acknowledging that this, like he kind of dismisses. I think he knows his brothers have that view of the world, that things like they're not like whether it's true or not true. He has to look at the world differently because of his experience with God and the dreams, and he was supposed to be where he was.
Good. So he has to look at the world differently. We'll come back to that. Mindy?
I actually think there's a couple of hidden messages here, but when Joseph says, "Am I God?" it's almost like implying, God intended this, yes, but you really need to also reconcile yourself with God, right? So I think there's a couple of hidden messages here that
That's
Joseph
beautiful.
is saying to his brothers.
Beautiful, right? Like, I'm not God, but like, hey, you should take this up with God. I like
Right.
that your phrasing of a hidden message. What, anyone, did I see another hand? No. Okay. So he's changed. He's a better person. And what is he, the message that Joseph there might be hidden messages, but one of the explicit messages is that Joseph gives us is what? It was all for the best. It was all intended to be this way. Have no fear, he says, because God, this was supposed to unfold this way all along, right? And so my question for us is like, where in our lives do we find ourselves going to that place? It was all for the best place. And in what ways is it helpful? And in what ways is it not helpful? It's not an uncommon, it's a very human reaction to say like that suffering that I endured, actually it was meant to be. It is what it is. It was meant to be. And then it's all for the best. Right. And so Joseph's tying it very clearly to his faith. And I would love to play with that a little bit. And the way I want to play with that is by sharing a midrash. Ed, do you want to speak first, or you want to hear?
I don't think it's at all a normal human reaction to say that suffering was all for the best.
All right, Ed, you and I are going to continue to be the pessimist and the optimist in the room. Fair enough. You are fair. You are right. For some people, it's a normal human reaction. And for other people, it is not. That is very fair. Thank you for calling me on that. I'm going to pull up a midrash, and then Debbie, I see you. And then we'll get back into the discussion. You could be first up. So here's the midrash. Hold on. Let me make it bigger in the screen. Okay. So the midrash is on this line, right, from Genesis that we just read. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph bears a grudge against us. So the midrash asks, what did they see that made them afraid? Like, it's a weird verb. Joseph's brothers saw their fathers were dead. Their father was dead. So here it goes. As they were returning from burying their father, they saw that Joseph turned off the road and went to look at the pit into which his brothers had cast him. Upon seeing this, they said, he still bears a grudge in his heart. Now that our father is dead, he will make his hatred of us felt. But in fact, Joseph's motive was a pious one. He wanted to utter a blessing for the miracle wrought for him in that place. All right, Debbie, you're up.
Joseph saw that, his life turned out to be better. And what did he have to gain by turning against his brothers and making his brothers slaves? He had the best, he wound up with the best of the world. So, he was not a spiteful person, obviously. And he had nothing else, he had nothing to gain for being cruel to his brothers, because his life turned out to be better than theirs. That's what
Got
I
it.
read.
So you're almost on the side of it did turn out for the best.
It did, didn't it?
That's on one level, and on another level, he's just being practical, because what's it going to get him to be cruel to his brothers at this point? Anyone else want to jump in? What do we make of this midrash? Yeah, Carol. Nope, you're not trying to speak. Sorry, your microphone looks like your microphone started as if you were speaking.
Sorry.
Curtis, did you want to say something?
You may want to say something.
Curtis, go ahead.
I think they wanted, I think a lot of it is he was still in a way testing seeing if they really were repentant. Instead of that they really meant it. Cause I think I agree with everyone that like, yeah, his life turned out to be better and than it might have been otherwise. And I mean, he could have been killed or something if he had stayed in the Eretz Israel there. And you know, eventually, but you know, he needed to get out of there. And I think the brothers, you know, had a, you know, the brothers kind of in a way felt for him, look what we did to him and everything. And I think in that way they were repentant, but they were also very fearful, and they didn't really need to be fearful if they had understood the deeper meaning and how he was testing them and stuff. So
Yeah, and I think the Midrash deepens their repentance, right? It's like they're
Yeah.
haunted by it. They're walking back. They
Mhm,
buried the
mhm,
father. It's
mhm.
all done. It's in the past. They reconciled already. Joseph's brought them all, set them all up to live in Goshen. Everything's fine. But as they're walking, they see the pit, right? Like they revisit that place. And the only thing they can imagine is that Jacob, it's like a projection, right? That Joseph must be stuck in that place. Joseph must be thinking about what we're thinking about in that, when, you know, about that dark place, that pit over there, like literally the pit of despair, right? That they're walking by, right? The pit of shame, the pit of regret, right? Yeah, Linda, you're on mute though.
Is the pit really physically there, or is it something that they think about when they're in that area and remember, and it brings them to feel even guiltier because they've just buried their father?
Yes, beautiful. I'm so glad. Is it really physically, they literally saw the pit, which is what the Midrash is playing with, the seeing, or is it an emotional state? And this, I think, also can help us deepen the conversation, right? Because it's not, we don't necessarily go back to our places, physical places of trauma, right? But we do have these emotional states that we revisit, right? Or something reminds us, or there's a trigger to a past hardship or to a past moment of suffering. Something triggers us, whether that's grief or anger or, you know, whatever it is. And I feel like there's a message here for us, right? That there's some message about how we look back on our past traumas and how we live with them, right? And so I want to go to the place Joseph's going, which is the optimism place. Maybe Ed wants to take us someplace else, though.
Oh, well, it all depends on how it turned out. I mean, if your suffering really is temporary and you wind up in a good place, well, then you might be able to say, well, it all turned out for the best. But it doesn't always happen that way. When people suffer, they don't always end in a good place.
Anyone else want to join in? Alan, you're turning your camera on, but I don't know if that's because you're trying to unmute or you're just making friends with the camera. No, you're good. Gloria, yeah.
Okay, so I think there's like a lot of things going on here, and I think it's very symbolic of what goes on, only because it's very real right now. What goes on, right? Like a parent passes away and all of a sudden all the siblings are trying to figure out their place and where they belong and who's going to be the one to stand up. And I think everyone naturally, when you're going through grief and shock and sudden loss, right? You're thinking about, well, they did this and that one did that. And the brothers probably have some guilt involved in there too. And it's just everyone finding their place. And in many regards, Joseph is just stopping and just reflecting on what does that mean for him now, right? His father's no longer here. What is his relationships with his brothers? You know, in many families, the parent kind of holds everyone together, and you kind of hold on to, if you want to call it traumas or guilt or regret or whatever it is because of your parent. But now the parent isn't there anymore. And then all of that starts to resurrect in you. And I think that like, it's just a message of like, everyone's in a kind of vulnerable place and everyone's wondering, where are we going from here?
Yeah, I'm so glad you reminded us of the vulnerability of the grief moment, right? So it's not just the fear, which Joel, pulled out for us at the beginning, but I think you're right. I think there's a vulnerability in in that grief moment and the undoing of the family system, right? Which creates the opening, and there's a trauma, right? And I think that's what the Midrash about revisiting the pit is actually all about. And so Joseph is saying, actually, it was all miraculous, right? That's where the Midrash wants to bring. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion yesterday at the breakfast. I think it was Joel who said, if things are all according to God's plan, does it mean that there had to be a Holocaust for Israel to become a state? And it depends on your theology, but that's a pretty rough accusation against God, that he had to stick into his plan 6 million to be killed in order to have a Jewish state.
Yes, the problem of theodicy, of why there's evil in the world and how God fits into that, right? You go straight to that place. And especially, you know, like the Holocaust, like trumps everything, you know, game over. There's nothing, you know, or other forms of genocide and suffering, which is your point. Like not all suffering is for the best. And yet I think the salient question for us is, how do we live with our suffering? How do we live with our past traumas? Right. And I think what the Midrash is suggesting is, and maybe with this we'll conclude, is that we try and find a way to live with our past suffering as if it were a miracle, as if it were all for the best, right? It's encouraging us. It's trying to tip us toward making peace, not war, with our brothers, right? Finding that place of kindness, not operating from always the place of going back into the pit. Like the Midrash could have been, they saw Joseph climb into the pit and he sat there and he, you know, like he doesn't get in the pit in the Midrash. He walks right by and he says a blessing for the miracle, because as Debbie said, it actually turned out better for him. He never would have known that when he was sitting in the pit being sold into slavery. Like that was not part of the picture. And when we're in it, when we're in the depths of grief, Gloria, as you were saying, or of other, like when we're in the suffering moments, it's impossible to see. But often on the other side, you can see it. And I think what the Torah is encouraging us to do is to try and look at the world in a way that is positive, and to use Torah and community as a way of finding a way of relating to it with a sense of miracle and gratitude, so that we have something to lift us up, right? And that we're not always suffering back down into the pit of despair and into trauma. Because Ed, you're right. It doesn't always necessarily work out for the best, but we can work to look for the blessing, the silver lining, the thing that gives us hope, the whatever it is that we learned that has made our life better because we suffered. So we could keep going, but knowing that we still have some minyan to do, I'm going to, and some of us have to go off to work. Thank everybody for logging in. For those who need to move on with their day, go ahead. And for the rest of us, we will continue on with the service now. Have a great day, Paul, and everybody else who has to go. And we're back on page 78, friends, for anyone who's continuing on with minyan. Ashrei Yoshevetecha, Od Yalucha Salah.